My husband barely noticed me, so I started spending more time at the tennis club. What started as lessons turned into emotional intimacy, and then something worse. Here's how everything unraveled when he finally asked, "Why are you always with your coach?" I'm Sienna, I'm 34, and yeah, my marriage fell apart, but not for the reasons everyone thinks they know. So there I was, stuck at home while my husband Garrett flies all over the place for work. Gone 3 weeks out of every month, comes home exhausted, barely talks to me, except to ask what's for dinner or complain about his schedule. 8 months married, and I'm already feeling like his roommate instead of his wife. My friends kept saying I needed to get out more, do something for myself, stop waiting around for him to pay attention to me. Tennis seemed like a good idea. I used to play in high school, figured it would be easy to pick back up. The tennis club was nice enough, nothing too fancy, but clean and welcoming. My coach Finn is this tall guy from Australia, maybe 27 or 28, used to work in education before switching to coaching. Right away, he was different from what I expected. Most fitness people are all business, but Finn actually talked to me like a person. Asked about my background, my goals, made jokes during the lesson that actually made me laugh. When's the last time Garrett made me laugh? I honestly couldn't remember. Those first few weeks were exactly what I needed. An hour twice a week where someone actually paid attention to me, where I felt like I was improving at something, where I had real conversations instead of just logistics about who's picking up groceries or when the next flight leaves. Finn would compliment my progress, notice when I tried a new hairstyle, ask how my week was going. Basic human interaction that somehow felt revolutionary after months of being treated like furniture in my own house. The lessons started getting longer naturally. What began as 1-hour sessions turned into 90 minutes because Finn said I was progressing so well that I had natural talent worth developing. He'd suggest we work on specific techniques that required more time, and honestly, I wasn't complaining. Going home to an empty house after tennis just felt depressing, so why not stay longer and actually enjoy myself? Plus, Garrett was usually gone anyway, so it's not like anyone was waiting for me. Finn started asking about my personal life during water breaks. How long had Garrett and I been married? What was it like being with someone who traveled constantly? Whether I got lonely. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in months. He actually listened to my answers, asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely interested in understanding my situation. Unlike Garrett, who would nod absently while checking his phone whenever I tried to talk about anything deeper than weekend plans. We started grabbing coffee after lessons sometimes, just to continue conversations about tennis strategy that somehow always drifted into other topics. Finn would tell me about his life back in Australia, his family, his dreams of opening his own coaching facility someday. I'd share stories about my life before marriage, things I used to enjoy, dreams I'd put on hold. Conversations with him felt natural and engaging in a way that reminded me what it was like to connect with someone intellectually and emotionally. I started putting more effort into my appearance on tennis days, not necessarily for Finn, but because it felt good to look good, to feel attractive and put together again. Garrett barely noticed what I wore anymore, but Finn would always comment if I looked nice, say the color suited me, notice if I'd done something different with my makeup. Small acknowledgments that made me feel seen as a woman instead of just a wife going through the motions. The tennis club became my sanctuary, the place where I felt most like myself. I knew all the staff members, had my regular court times, felt comfortable and welcome there. Finn and I developed inside jokes, shared looks when other members did ridiculous things, built the kind of easy rapport that takes most people months to develop. It felt natural and comfortable, like we'd known each other for years instead of just a few months. Our text conversations started innocently enough. Questions about technique, scheduling confirmations, basic logistics, but gradually they became longer and more personal. Finn would ask how my day went. I'd tell him about whatever drama was happening with friends, or how frustrated I was with Garrett being gone again. He always knew exactly what to say to make me feel better. Always had this way of making my problems seem manageable and my feelings valid. One afternoon after a particularly good session, Finn suggested we celebrate with drinks instead of our usual coffee. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds before agreeing. We went to this quiet bar near the tennis club, nothing fancy, just somewhere to unwind and talk more freely. 2 drinks turned into 4, and I found myself telling Finn things I'd never shared with anyone. How isolated my marriage had become, how I felt like Garrett saw me as just another item on his to-do list rather than his partner. Finn was incredibly understanding and supportive. He told me I deserved better, that any man would be fortunate to have my attention and companionship. When he walked me to my car afterward, there was this moment where we just stood there looking at each other, and I could feel something shifting between us. Nothing happened, we just said goodnight, but I drove home with butterflies in my stomach that I hadn't felt in years. That night, Garrett called from whatever city he was in, going on about flight delays and difficult passengers, and all I could think was how Finn would never bore me with those kinds of mundane complaints. Finn cared about meaningful conversations, interesting topics, real connection, not just work drama and scheduling logistics. The contrast between the two men in my life was becoming impossible to ignore. Before I knew it, tennis had become a daily routine. Finn convinced me that if I was serious about improving, daily practice was essential for real progress. Made perfect sense to me. Why approach something halfway when you could commit fully and see real results? Besides, Garrett was gone for 2 weeks straight on some extended route, so what else was I supposed to do with my time? Sit at home and watch television while waiting for him to remember he had a wife. Finn and I developed this wonderful daily routine where I'd arrive every morning at 10, we'd train for 2 or 3 hours, then grab lunch and talk about everything and nothing. He was becoming my closest friend, honestly the only person in my life who really understood me. The other wives in my neighborhood just talked about their children or their husbands, careers, superficial topics that made me want to scream from boredom. Our conversations covered real subjects, deeper issues. Finn would ask about my dreams, what I wanted from life, whether I felt fulfilled in my current situation. These were questions Garrett never asked anymore, topics he seemed completely uninterested in exploring. Barrett made me feel intellectually stimulated in ways I'd forgotten were possible. The coaching itself was becoming more hands-on, too. Finn would adjust my form by positioning my arms correctly, demonstrating proper swing mechanics through physical guidance. Completely normal coaching techniques, but I'd be dishonest if I said I didn't notice how strong his hands were, how close he'd stand when explaining complex movements. Sometimes our eyes would meet for just a moment longer than necessary, and I'd feel this electricity that I definitely wasn't experiencing at home with Garrett. We'd have these extended conversations during breaks, sitting close together on the courtside bench, and Finn would tell me how different I was from his other students. Most of them just wanted to complete their lessons and leave, but I genuinely cared about improvement, about understanding the sport properly. He said I was special, that he looked forward to our sessions more than anything else in his day. After months of feeling invisible and unappreciated, hearing those words was intoxicating. When Garrett finally returned from his trip, he barely asked about my tennis progress. Just assumed everything was fine, gave me a quick kiss hello, and immediately started sorting through his mail and checking work messages. Meanwhile, I'd been practically living at the tennis club, had formed this incredible connection with Finn, and my husband couldn't even be bothered to show genuine interest in my new passion. That night at dinner, I tried telling Garrett about my improvement, how Finn thought I had real potential for competitive play, but Garrett just nodded absently while scrolling through his phone. When I suggested he come watch me play sometime, support me the way other husbands supported their wives' interests, he said he'd try to fit it into his schedule, try to fit it in like supporting his wife was some kind of inconvenience that might conflict with more important priorities. The next morning, I told Finn about Garrett's lukewarm reaction, and Finn just shook his head sympathetically. He said any husband should feel proud to have a wife who is passionate about self-improvement, who worked hard to better herself physically and mentally. Finn understood me in ways Garrett never had, even during our honeymoon phase when everything was supposedly perfect between us. Our text conversations became constant, good morning messages, updates throughout the day, good night texts that sometimes continued for hours. Finn would send tennis tips, funny observations about other club members, thoughtful questions about how I was feeling. The attention was absolutely intoxicating after months of being completely ignored by my own husband. I started anticipating Finn's messages, more than Garrett's obligatory calls from whatever city he happened to be working in. One afternoon, Finn suggested we practice serves at the outdoor courts since all the indoor facilities were reserved. The setting felt more private and intimate somehow, away from the usual crowd of members and staff. When Finn positioned himself behind me to adjust my serving stance, I could smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his body close to mine. My heart started racing in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with physical exercise. And when I turned around, Finn was looking at me with an intensity that made my knees feel weak. So Garrett comes home from another business trip and suddenly he's full of questions about my tennis schedule. Like, where was this curiosity 3 months ago when I first started lessons? He's asking why I'm going every single day, why the sessions last so long, whether I really need that much professional instruction. I explained exactly what I'm telling you. Finn says I have genuine talent, that daily practice is the only way to reach my potential. But Garrett's looking at me like I'm being deceptive, which just shows how little he understands about athletic training and personal development. Then he drops this completely unreasonable demand. He wants to attend one of my lessons. Just shows up and expects to be included in something that's mine, something I've built and developed without any input from him. I told him it wouldn't work because Finn tailors each session specifically to my skill level and learning style, and having a spectator would be distracting and counterproductive. Plus, Finn and I have developed this perfect teaching rhythm that works beautifully. Why would I want to mess with something successful? But Garrett keeps pushing the issue, acting like I'm hiding something, when really, I just want to protect the one positive thing in my life. He's making implications and suggestions that are completely inappropriate and unfair. Meanwhile, he's been absent for weeks at a time, comes home exhausted and distracted, barely pays attention to anything I say about my interests or feelings, and now he wants to play the concerned husband role. Where was this energy when I was telling him how lonely I felt, how much I needed something meaningful to look forward to? I finally lost my temper and told him the truth he didn't want to hear. Maybe if he was home more often, maybe if he actually acted like he cared about my emotional well-being, I wouldn't need to spend so much time at the tennis club finding the connection and attention I wasn't getting in my marriage. Maybe if he asked about my day with half the enthusiasm he showed for his flight schedules and work problems, I wouldn't need someone else to have real conversations with. Finn appreciates me as a person. Finn listens when I talk. Finn makes me feel like my thoughts and feelings actually matter. Is it my fault that my tennis coach does a better job of being emotionally present in my life than my own husband? I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, just basic human connection and acknowledgement that I existed as more than just a housekeeper and meal preparer. Garrett went completely silent, just staring at me like I'd physically attacked him. Then he starts this whole speech about how he works to support our lifestyle, how his career requires extensive travel, how I knew exactly what I was signing up for when I married him. Like that's supposed to excuse years of emotional neglect and disengagement. He acts like providing financially is equivalent to being a real partner, like paying bills means he doesn't have to actually show up emotionally or invest in our relationship. I told him that money doesn't cure loneliness and a house isn't a home when you're the only person in it most of the time. Material comfort doesn't replace emotional intimacy, and I didn't get married just to have someone fund my lifestyle while ignoring my actual needs as a human being. Then Garrett says something that really crossed the line. He asks if there's something I need to tell him about Finn. The accusation in his voice, the immediate assumption that I must be doing something inappropriate just because I'd found someone who actually valued my company and conversation. I told him he was being paranoid and jealous over absolutely nothing, that Finn is a consummate professional and I'm a married woman who respects her commitments. But honestly, the fact that Garrett immediately jumped to suspicion instead of trying to understand why I needed more emotional connection in my life just proved everything I'd been saying. He doesn't trust me, he doesn't really know me, and he certainly doesn't appreciate what I bring to our relationship. His first instinct was to blame me rather than examine his own behavior and contributions to our problems. After that argument, Garrett started monitoring me like I was some kind of criminal, asking detailed questions about my tennis schedule, wanting to know exactly when I'd be home, checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The man who couldn't be bothered to ask about my day for months was suddenly acting like a private investigator. He even had the audacity to suggest I find a different coach, like Finn was the problem, instead of Garrett's complete failure as an emotionally present husband. I told him absolutely not. Finn and I had built an incredible training relationship, and I wasn't about to throw that away because Garrett suddenly decided to care about my activities. The progress I'd made was directly related to Finn's coaching style and our personal connection. Why would I sabotage my own development to appease my husband's insecurities? The tension at home became absolutely unbearable. Garrett would make these passive-aggressive comments about how much time I spent at the tennis club, how much the lessons were costing, whether I was really improving enough to justify daily coaching sessions. Meanwhile, Finn was being nothing but supportive, telling me how proud he was of my progress, how I was his most dedicated and talented student. The contrast was absolutely striking. My coach believed in me more than my own husband did. Things with Finn were intensifying in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Our conversations had moved far beyond tennis technique and strategy. He'd share details about his dreams and ambitions, his past relationships, how he'd never encountered anyone quite like me. I found myself confiding everything: my frustrations with Garrett, my fears about my marriage, my dreams of feeling truly alive and appreciated again. Finn understood me in ways Garrett never had, and the emotional connection we'd built felt more authentic than anything I had at home. One afternoon, after a particularly excellent lesson, Finn asked directly if I was happy in my marriage. No beating around the bush, no careful diplomacy, just a straightforward question that demanded an honest answer. I told him truthfully that I hadn't felt genuinely happy in a very long time, that Garrett and I had evolved into strangers who happened to share living space. Finn said he could see how unhappy I was, that I deserved so much more than a husband who treated me like an afterthought in my own life. When he reached out and touched my hand, I didn't pull away. The next few weeks felt like living a double life. At home, Garrett was watching my every move, questioning my schedule, making me feel like a prisoner in my own marriage. But with Finn, I felt free, appreciated, genuinely cared for, in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. We started meeting for coffee after lessons regularly, and our conversations became increasingly intimate and personal. Finn would tell me how beautiful I was, how any man would be incredibly fortunate to have me, how he couldn't understand why Garrett didn't treasure what he had right in front of him. These weren't just empty compliments, they felt genuine and heartfelt, backed up by months of real attention and emotional investment. Finally, Garrett presented me with an ultimatum. He said I had to choose: either quit tennis entirely and work on our marriage, or he was done with our relationship. Just like that, no discussion, no compromise, no acknowledgement of his role in creating our problems. He wanted me to give up the one thing that made me happy, the one person who actually understood and appreciated me, and return to being his lonely, ignored housewife. I actually laughed at the absurdity of it. I told him if he felt so threatened by my tennis coach that he needed to control my activities and friendships, then maybe our marriage was already beyond saving. I said Finn had treated me better in 3 months than Garrett had managed in 3 years of marriage. That was apparently the final straw for Garrett. He said if I valued my tennis coach more than my marriage, then I could figure out how to pay for those lessons myself, since he was done funding my hobby. He moved into the guest bedroom that night, and barely spoke to me for days afterward. Honestly, the silence was preferable to his accusations and controlling behavior. At least when he wasn't talking, he wasn't making me feel guilty for finally finding some happiness and fulfillment. Finn noticed the change in my mood immediately and kept asking if everything was okay at home. His genuine concern for my well-being was so different from Garrett's angry demands and ultimatums. Here was someone who actually cared about my emotional state, who wanted to help me through a difficult situation, instead of making it worse with threats and manipulation. 3 months later, Garrett filed for divorce. He claimed irreconcilable differences in the paperwork, but really it was because he couldn't handle that I'd found someone who actually appreciated me as a person. I moved out of our house and into a small apartment, thinking Finn and I could finally be together openly, without all the sneaking around and guilt trips from Garrett. I was ready to start fresh with someone who truly understood me, except things didn't unfold the way I'd imagined they would. Finn started acting differently after I left Garrett, like suddenly our connection wasn't as exciting or interesting anymore. He'd cancel lessons at the last minute, take much longer to respond to my text messages, and when I suggested we make our relationship official, he got all uncomfortable and said he needed time to think about things. Think about what exactly? We'd been building toward this moment for months, but then I discovered the real truth about Finn's character. He had been running the exact same routine with 2 other married students, the same intimate conversations, the same special attention, the same promises about their potential, and how different they were from his other clients. Apparently, I wasn't nearly as special as he'd made me feel. I was just another lonely housewife he could manipulate for attention, money, and ego validation. When I confronted him about his pattern of behavior, he had the absolute nerve to act like I was being dramatic and unreasonable, like our connection hadn't been real and meaningful. He said he enjoyed our time together but had never made any serious promises or commitments. Never promised anything? He literally told me I deserved better than Garrett, that he'd never met anyone like me, that I was special among all his students. I tried desperately to salvage things with Finn for several more weeks, but he kept pulling away and creating distance. Finally, he told me he was moving back to Australia to reconcile with an ex-girlfriend who'd been begging him to come home. Just like that, the man who'd convinced me to throw away my marriage was walking out of my life, like I'd meant absolutely nothing to him. Meanwhile, Garrett had already moved on completely. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I saw pictures on social media of him with some woman, apparently a colleague he'd met through work. She looked so happy and in love, exactly the way I used to look in our early relationship photos. The worst part was seeing how different Garrett appeared with her. Relaxed, genuinely smiling, present in a way he'd never been with me toward the end. They got engaged after dating for only 8 months. 8 months. It had taken him over 2 years to propose to me, and we'd been together much longer before marriage. Seeing them together made me realize that maybe the problem wasn't just Garrett's travel schedule or work demands. Maybe we simply weren't compatible in ways I'd refused to acknowledge. But by then, it was far too late to fix anything or try a different approach. I was alone in my tiny apartment. Finn was gone forever, and Garrett was building a beautiful life with someone who apparently inspired him to be the partner I'd always wanted him to be. My friends from the tennis club stopped including me in social events once Finn left town. Turns out, they'd all known about his pattern with married students and had just felt sorry for me. The humiliation of being the last to know, of being seen as another naive victim, was absolutely crushing. Even the divorce settlement went badly for me. Since I'd been the one to leave the marriage, and Garrett could prove I'd been having an inappropriate relationship with Finn, I received far less than I'd expected. I had to find employment for the first time in years, and the only positions I qualified for paid barely enough to cover rent on my small apartment. Looking back now, I don't regret leaving Garrett, because our marriage was already dead and unsalvageable. But I absolutely hate that I trusted Finn so completely, hate that I believed his lies about me being special and different. Mostly, I hate that Garrett found happiness so quickly and easily, while I'm still struggling to figure out what went wrong and how to rebuild my life. But it's not my fault that Finn turned out to be a manipulative player who preyed on vulnerable women. And it's not my fault that my marriage wasn't strong enough to survive when I finally found someone who seemed to appreciate me. Some people just aren't meant to be together, and some people aren't who they pretend to be. That's life, and now I have to deal with the consequences and try to move forward somehow.